everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Darley and Inglis. Today, the pattern. What can we do to fix one of racing's most political issues? Rising rents for Sydney trainers, and a feature interview with former Racing Queensland CEO and now wagering executive, Jason Scott. In breeding and bloodstock, what did we learn from our weekend in the Hunter Valley? A boost for the Tassie industry and a milestone for a champion stallion. And in wagering, strong results for Tabcorp. What do they mean? And a boost for on-course betting and a key appointment for Entain. Tim, thanks for joining us as always. The political cycle of the pattern keeps coming back with the centre of discussion there at the Hunter Valley over the weekend, and a big discussion point at the moment. First of all, just bring us up to date on the timelines of where things are at and I guess what is being decided by the Racing Australia board next week.
Just call me the driver, Bren, after guiding you around the Hunter last weekend, which was fine. I was happy to do that and thoroughly enjoyed it. But yes, back on the pattern. Look, there's a meeting next Tuesday, September 2nd. The Racing Australia board will come together, and I'm sure it'll be hotly debated where to take these pattern guidelines and try to implement them. But from what I'm hearing, no one wants to say anything publicly, really. With the powers of veto between Racing Victoria and Racing New South Wales, they're on the opposite sides of the argument, certainly at the moment, or certainly was earlier this week. I can't see anything getting through. So the impasse will continue and sort of the stalemate. Nothing's happened since 12 months ago when it was called off. So whether Racing New South Wales push ahead and upgrade some races and that aren't internationally recognised and won't be in the catalogue, time will tell. But I don't know when it ends. Someone has to compromise, and the personalities involved, maybe they won't.
Yeah, I mean, the likely consequence of a continued impasse, as you mentioned, is that those New South Wales races upgraded last season, the 17 of them, which remain upgraded according to Racing Australia, despite the fact they haven't got international pedigree recognition. They'll probably stay in the same state they're in, and that would be one rule for one lot and one rule for another. There's probably a question about whether PRAs can upgrade other races without broader approval. Group 1 races are probably a bit more sort of, I guess, sacrosanct probably might be a bit too strong of a word, but certainly you can't just upgrade to Group 1 for the sake of it. So we'll see what happens around that. The Golden Eagle and the Rother Boarding are probably the two races there, which Racing New South Wales would like to see upgraded. And then, I guess what we're seeing, Tim, is this impasse is impacting the mood of the industry because it's making people feel like there's dysfunction at the heart of the way things are being run. And that's the reality of it. We've spoken to plenty of people, you and I, over the last couple of weeks about this issue, most of which don't want to go on the record, but those comments are generally around the fact until this veto issue at Racing Australia that Racing Victoria and Racing New South Wales possess is addressed and possibly, there's a better way found to resolve these things, then we're always going to be in this situation, particularly with the current personalities involved. Highly unlikely anyone can be the circuit breaker, is it, Tim? It's highly unlikely anyone's going to come along and be able to sort this one through. And, the reality is the pattern's been in a holding state for Australia since 2018, 2019, when they last met the Patt Committee. Unlikely we're going to be able to see this resolution in a short period of time.
The only compromise I can see just how determined Racing New South Wales is to get, I guess, particularly Group 1 status for the Russell Balding and the Golden Eagle, which, on Victoria Derby Day, then they could push their case for Whirlpool inclusion. They can take it straight to the Asian Patent Committee, but maybe that's where the compromise may come if they go, let's help the other PRAs help us push for that, and we'll compromise on, having a committee to meet and, upgrade and, importantly, downgrade races. There's sort of, and I said it the other day somewhere else, Bren, but just these upgrade of so many races just devalues the pattern and black type and certainly black types like the T20 cricket or Big Bash, in my view. It was great when it was 6 weeks. Now it's 3 months and you're sort of sick of it and just loses its appeal and value and relevance.
Yeah. Where does it end is the question, Tim. Do we end up like, the reality is if everyone lines up to get a Group 1 up, grow in about 100 Group 1s and end up with, 800 black type races. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. And at some point there needs to be some rationalisation. It impacts on Australia's reputation internationally, particularly when it comes to bloodstock. There's a whole bunch of other things in there. What does a Group 1 mean? That's 76, in my humble opinion. Far too many already Group 1s. We're heading only higher from there. We'll flick on now to the A to C trainers. We're unhappy with the notice given to them on a rent increase, 10% rise this comes amidst the broader context of a rising cost of ownership, the challenging trading models of trainers in terms of their commercial models, Tim. This one has caused a bit of a ruckus. I mean, we've seen rents go up elsewhere, particularly in country New South Wales, significantly much more than this in terms of overall percentage. But look, it just the general feeling of the trainers were the period of notice given for this, i.e. 1 week from the ATC, was not acceptable.
Yeah, it's just the way it was communicated. Talking to Richard Callender, the CEO of the Trainers Association, they're not arguing that rentals shouldn't go up to some degree. Obviously, just because of the cost of living, everything's gone up, inflation. It's just a week's notice is to plan for businesses, and then a lot of trainers have already sent out notices for the coming year saying this is what our training fees are going to be, inform their owners, and then they receive an email on Monday going, next Monday, your stable rents are going up by, $1.15 a day. It doesn't sound like much, but you add it over, 1,200 boxes and, on tight margin businesses as training is, it's a decent impost, and most will have to pass it on to their owners, which, something has to give, and maybe that'll force owners out of the game. But it's just, the communication or lack of communication is what's a sticking point and upset, quite the trainers really. And I think the ATC and the board and Tim Hale, speaking to him yesterday, even I think they would acknowledge that they probably haven't handled it as well as they could have.
Yeah, and I think that the relationship between those who run the racing industry, effectively the PRAs or the clubs, and those who operate within it, such as the licensed participants, trainers, jockeys, etc., it's always a point of tension, but particularly at the moment, it's a point of tension. We had issues with the jockeys in Victoria earlier last year, I think. I can't remember who that was. It was relatively recent. There's obviously got the ongoing challenges with the trainers and what's going on here. I think there's sort of a broader thing at play here, Tim, which is, you've got the clubs who are trying to make their business model work. We understand the ATC's challenges. They've been laid bare across the last 18 months. But how do we get to a point where, everyone's pulling in the same direction and not just sort of, basically operating for their own benefit and not on the broader benefit? And I think there's probably some questions there to be asked, I would say.
Yeah, and who, the ATC is subsidising training and maintenance of tracks by about 7.9 million last year or 20, yeah. And so, it comes down to this argument, who should be paying? Should Racing New South Wales be putting in more money to the clubs for track maintenance? And, chicken and the egg, there's so many arguments there and where it ends up. But, it generates about $500,000, this price rise in extra revenue estimated. So the ATC also said they will put a percentage of that back into the tracks and stables and things like that. You're going to have to look at Leilani Lodge with Kieran Maher getting those stables at Randwick, I believe. Part of the deal for him is he has to foot the bill for infrastructure upgrades rather than the club doing it, which, be different under if you're renting a house, that the owner would, foot the bill for upkeep and different things like that. So it's an interesting scenario at the moment.
And we welcome on board here at Straight Talk Jason Scott, former Racing Queensland CEO and now Chief Executive of the Bookie Group, to talk all things racing and wagering. Jason, always good to have you on board, and thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Bren. Tim, thanks for having me.
And so how do you reflect on your time inside the PRA world, Jason? It was a couple of years working with Racing Queensland. Sort of, how do you look back on that and think, it's been a time of great change in Australian racing and Queensland racing as well. What's your reflection on it?
I think I look back at it as it was a great learning experience for me into the politicism within racing and the difficulty that administrators and others have in creating that change. And I think, New South Wales is the exception, but people forget that Peter's been there for 20 years. And Peter really didn't change a hell of a lot in the first 10 years. But what he did, he gained trust and created his fiefdom within politics, which is now giving him the imprimatur to almost do what he wants. He's got a war chest. To come in there, I don't have that sort of patience. I think we probably achieved quite a lot in greyhounds and harness. I think getting into Dominions, a new greyhound track. Racing in Queensland is very heavily politicised between the city and the bush, the city and the provincial tracks. Basically, you've got a finite amount of money and everybody wants two things. They want more prize money and they want to race on Saturdays. And every club you go to, if we just a little bit of prize money here, and I think we could put more. Everyone wants more Saturday meetings, and a lot of that is self-interest because they want to be re-elected onto their committees and say they've got that. And that's probably where I struggle the most, where you've got so many different areas pushing in completely opposite angles, usually for self-interest rather than for the overall good of racing in Queensland.
Jason, obviously, there's a political cycle involved, and you're dealing with wagering companies and sort of various other aspects of it. You're in a tri-code environment. I mean, you're kind of being wedged between government, the wagering industry, and stakeholders. I mean, how difficult is to try to achieve change in that situation?
Yeah, look, in my period where I was working in Racing Queensland, we also had the problem with diminishing revenue as well. And my chairman, Steve Wilson, he had a novel term that we were not for loss. So if we made a profit, it was fine. You could put that away for next year into future infrastructure projects. But it was important that we didn't overspend and lose money. So balancing that against, the wagering is very important, particularly in a period where we've got reduction in people wagering. We've seen that with all of the results that have come in the last couple of years. To spending that money more wisely, and it probably makes you think. You really think about every dollar and where it goes, and then you've got an equity basis across 121 thoroughbred tracks and 3 plus the greyhounds plus the harness, that you've got to spend your money in a way that everybody is being looked after to some degree, certainly politically, because if a local member's not happy, they're straight on the phone to the minister. And I worked under ministers from both sides of government, and they both felt exactly the same pressure from the local members who are doing what they need to do to look after themselves. And then you've also got committees and chairpersons or whatever else in the minister's ear lobbying for more money being pushed that direction. So that's an incredible balancing act. And what probably one of the skills that I did bring into Racing Queensland is an understanding of wagering and how to maximise that wagering through types of racing we put on, times where we run racing, all of those little things where 1% and 2% is very useful for us at this period. The political side for me, I worked under two ministers who had very, very different ways of looking at things, but you can see when both ministers, if something comes up, they mentally work out who's the local member in the area that you're talking about that you might have a problem in.
Yeah. I mean, you said before that perhaps your personality wasn't, and you sort of implied before that wasn't the best fit for working within a PRA. But the question I have is, what personality is, and is that personality conducive to good leadership for the industry?
I think the right personality is somebody that has that patience, but you also need a strong financial mind and a really sound understanding of racing and a social conscience and patience. Because racing's been my hobby since I was 12 years old, as well as a profession for the last 25 years, I came in with preordained ideas, and some of those were right and some of them were wrong or impractical. So it's somebody that has that patience to be able to work through those things and probably build relationships for someone who's going to be at 60, 70 race meetings a year, as well as working however many hours you need to work at it. And that's probably only going to go that many meetings if you're working in tri-codes. But, carnival period in Queensland is fairly busy.
Jason, Lachlan Murray's stepped into your role now, so on a temporary basis and perhaps a longer term. How does he fit that profile? I think he came from a wagering background as well.
Yeah, look, I really hope that Lachlan's interim role turns into a permanent role because he has got the perfect background for it. He understands wagering. He started with Mark Reed in the early 2000s, worked at Sportsbet when they acquired Mark's. Then I spent some time with him when I was CEO at Ladbrokes. He was CFO. And when we had a hole in that position, he was sort of like a no-brainer for me to bring him in. He's got a incredibly patient, thorough attitude. He's a hard worker. Understanding the numbers is a huge advantage. But I also think he's the sort of person that people do want to work with. He forges those relationships, and I think he's the perfect man for the job right now. And as I said, I like to hope that he gets extended.
How important, it's an interesting one because there's probably some resistance from those within the racing industry that people from wagering get involved, PRA level or the wagering background like yourself and Lachlan to a certain extent. How important is for PRAs and race clubs to have people with proper wagering experience and understanding the way that works in terms of helping shape those key decisions, Jason?
Well, 100% of our revenue in Queensland comes from wagering, either from the point of consumption tax or from the race fields fee. So if you have someone in there who doesn't understand how to maximise your revenue, you're already starting one place behind the other. Now, I understand the feedback, but that feedback's usually from people who have been used to running inefficient models. And, I had it all the time. We've got a right to race. No one's got a right to race. We don't even have a right to race as an industry. We've got to keep earning that social license. We've got to keep showing the improvement. We've come a really long way in the last 10 or 20 years in terms of safety, in terms of aftercare for horses, in terms of how we're managing injuries. And we've got to continue to do that, or we won't have an industry. We've just seen a tiny little bit of that with greyhounds in Tasmania, and very hopeful that the other 5 states don't get into some sort of Me Too position and listen to the activists, because once greyhounds is finished, it'll start on harness, and then they'll move to thoroughbreds. I copped a lot of flack for saying at a meeting with country racing people that I think there's a chance racing's not here in 35 or 40 years. And if it's handled incorrectly, it won't be.
Jason, as role at Racing Queensland, you're a delegate on the Asian Patent Committee, and that's the Australian patent or lack thereof is a frustration for many at the moment. Can you see that being resolved anytime soon?
Look, I went to my last meeting of RA in May, and the way things move in the machinations, a lot will have happened between May and August. So I'm not the right guy to ask if it's going to be solved in the short term. I know there's a meeting next week, and I'm not sure how close New South Wales and Victoria are. In the end, Racing Australia is completely controlled by those 2 states due to the right of veto that they have. So where it gets to, I don't think. Well, I know we're not going to go back to the traditional patent model that a lot in industry would like to have seen happen. We've got RA, Victoria, and New South Wales. We've got legal advice from 3 different firms, basically saying it's a breach of trade.
So you foresee that being a longer term impasse then? Like that's always going to be something that has to be overcome, Jason.
Yeah, look, I think one of the main sticking points is races of historical significance. I look at the Queensland. If you're doing it purely on the ratings, Queensland, South Australia, Derby and Oaks would probably be at risk. And I suspect the Victorian Derby is probably at risk too. I didn't spend too much time looking at Victoria, but it's been a pretty bad race for a long time. And perhaps even the Melbourne Cup could potentially be at risk now. Does it matter if they're not a Group 1? My practical way of looking at it is it doesn't matter if the Melbourne Cup or the Everest or the Golden Eagle is a Group 1 or not. You're not going to sell one extra bet and one extra eyeball on it, or get one extra horse not travel from the other side of the world to race in the race. So to me, I think a lot of it is semantics. It used to mean a lot when we talk about the page at the sales. Well, that's all we had the page to look at. Now we're a lot more sophisticated. Everybody might look at the Cox plate, but there's strong Cox plates and weak Cox plates. And when people are going back, they've got the videos, they've got the fields, they've got all this data they never had before. So the paid and saying that you've won a flight stakes into an Oaks, into a Caulfield Cup, into a Melbourne Cup for a broodmare probably isn't that important, those race names and what their actual group are, because people don't have a look at the quality of the race now. You can't underestimate the amount of work that both the buyers and the breeders are doing. So look, I tend to think it's a bit of a brouhaha about nothing. Now the traditionalists will say, I don't know what I'm talking about.
But a few people in the Hunter Valley might disagree with you from last week.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. But they're also the people that are doing a lot of this work to understand the quality of, they're looking into that before they buy a stallion.
Just on that, Jason, the Victoria Derby would be in danger, I think. And as you mentioned, I got told that possibly, for races like that, you can change the conditions, or, they could bring the distance back to 2,000 metres, which buys the race probably 2 years time to sort of try and get the ratings back up, things like that. I'm not saying that's the right answer or the right.
I think the Oakley
move,
Plate's
but
another one, Tim,
yeah.
from memory, that's probably at risk as well. Now, traditional races, I'm not sure if it's that important, particularly we have so many Group 1 and Group 2 sprint races in Australia.
Yeah, well, the challenge is that not too many race clubs want to be sitting there putting up front and centre trying to promote a Group 2. That's probably the challenge for them. Like it's either Group 1 or nothing, because then the pattern means like that. We'll move away from the pattern because we could probably talk about it all day and onto a space you found yourself in the past and you find yourself in now, Jason. It's the wagering world. How do you see the health of the wagering industry in Australia at the moment, Jason?
Oh, look, I saw the inflation numbers were up yesterday, which is going to put a halt to a couple more interest rate cuts. I think, in a time where cost of living's at an all-time high, interest rates are high, disposable incomes at a low, to the average family, wagering's one of the places where that loses in that disposable income place. I think we're seeing a few green shoots in terms of it turning around. I was really heartened to see Tab's numbers yesterday, but again, they've still had a decrease in their digital numbers. So, and a lot of that is we are much better now in terms of managing harm factors, anti-money laundering, responsible gambling. So in a lot of cases, that decrease is actually a positive. That people who can't afford to bet now aren't betting. The actual size of the sort of participants. Yeah, look, from a punter's point of view and from a competitor's point of view, I wouldn't want to see sports bet get much bigger. I think if they get to over 50% of the market, it starts to become you're getting a little bit too monopolistic for me. Now, the next question is M&A good? I think we certainly need 3 or 4 strong pillars. I'd like to think there's a gap behind them for people with 3-4% of the market. And that's where sort of places like Unibet, 365. I think we need some more mid-tier players, and frankly, that's an opportunity that I think that is still possible.
Yeah. I mean, you sort of addressed that question now. When Tabcorp's results came out during the week, plenty of positives from them. I mean, obviously the Victorian licence has driven them, a lot of positivity and a lot of their growth this year. And, that was probably put in place a couple of years ago under previous management. But obviously the plans are to, relook at the New South Wales deal and what that look is. How important is a vibrant, sort of healthy Tabcorp to the industry and the landscape, Jason? Or is it a case that if Tabcorp is a bit vulnerable, then there's more sort of movement and agitation elsewhere?
Look, I think you need a vibrant retail player. Now, I don't really care if it's called Tabcorp, Entain, Sportsbet, Bluebet, PointsBet, Better, but you do need that. And look, their growth wasn't lost on me in retail. The cynic in me does wonder how much of that's come from those that have been AML and RG'd out of
the cash, the cash,
and
the cash shoved.
Who've signed up for BetStop, and then sometimes they forget that perhaps they're not really good at this caper. So I'd be really interested to see what that trajectory looks like over the next few years, because, for a decade, they haven't been reporting their retail numbers as really intricately as they've been going the wrong direction. So I think that's a positive. Where, as I said, whether it's Tabcorp's in a really interesting place. They tell me Max Gaming's worth 500 or 600 million. What do they do with that money? If they get that money to, it's going to cost them roughly $1 billion. I've heard New South Wales, Graham and Peter say, unless it's got a B in front of it, they're not going to do a deal on New South Wales. If I use PointsBet as some sort of level, Entain is probably worth close to $1 billion, 1.2 to 1.3, less the fine, probably you get to $1 billion. Now, where does Gil go and spend his 600 if he sells Max Gaming? What's more important in terms of overall growth going forward? Interesting decision for them, because they probably can't afford both in the short term. And he's not a man who's going to sit on his hand and not do something going forward. So I suspect he'll do one of them in the next 12 to 18 months. Yeah, so look, I'm very big that the industry needs a retail presence.
Jason, you've been an advocate, certainly at Racing Queensland, for the necessity for a national tote. I mean, you still have that view, and that will it happen?
Gil's promised me it's going to happen, and we've got 10 at Racing Queensland. The new Greyhound track's got 10 boxes in it on the straight track, and we can't use it because Tabcorp can't technically run a pool for 10 greyhound races, which I don't completely understand because they already run a Melbourne Cup for 24. Surely you just put 10 and scratch 9 and 10. And I was told from people, this didn't come from Gilbert, it came from other people at Tabcorp, we can't do that. All hands on deck on the national tote pool, or certainly getting it down to 2. So they're clearly working on it. I think it's imperative for the 2 smaller codes. Those exotic pools and even the win pools in those smaller codes. Well, if a guy's in a pub, he can't even have $200 on something without changing the price. And while the corporates or the digital bookmakers are all betting tote derivatives, the industry needs dividends that are actually representative of their fixed odds price, rather than the Tats Lotto that you're currently getting due to the particularly in the old Unitab pool, but Victoria and New South Wales really aren't much stronger. I know Jocko's there tidying it up to try and make it look, where he thinks they should start. And if he stopped betting into those pools, it would be an absolute mess.
Mm. Talk us through your new role, Jason, with the bookie group. I mean, what are you sort of hoping to achieve in that position? It's obviously a very different role than one you've been doing. What are your ambitions there?
My ambitions are that's 1, 2, 3% of market. I think is still able to be achieved. I'm working with bet makers, which will allow us to run a fairly thin ship in terms of employees. So I want to keep the costs really low. I'm going to run 4 or 5 brands, partnering with people and organisations tangentially connected to racing, who have databases and work with them and market direct. So I want to keep the cost down. I want to use a cross between a little bit what Double are doing, influencer type marketing. I think the days of going in and building for scale with the hope of selling for the synergies advantage, it doesn't appeal to me. I think you can be EBITDA positive from the beginning. And if you get to a size where you're making 15 or 20 million EBITDA, 6 or 8 times multiple, you've got a decent sized business to either sell or to list. So, it's a long-term plan. But I think one of the abilities I've got, I know the industry well, and I've got access to the right people to come and work with me and for me who are looking at this slightly different model. And that, there's some really interesting partners that I'm speaking to, and very close to putting pen to paper with a couple.
Yeah. And probably personality-wise, probably suits the way you like to think, Jason.
Suits the way I like to think, and we'll have a bit of fun. One of the brands we're about to bring out is betit.com.au, and if you read that incorrectly, it could read as btit.com.au, which provides many marketing opportunities, Bren. But we'll stick with Betit. But yeah, so we'll get out there, and we'll have brands that are sort of pointed in different directions and different socioeconomics, but I'll be using a lot of social media, Instagram, those kind of things, and trying to build a business that way from the ground up. And as I said, unashamedly plagiarise a few of the things that Tom Rundle and Double have done, because they are the business growing the fastest in our industry.
So Benny Scarf's not doing is he stable switch, is he? Or
no, we don't worry, we've got something similar but different. I think Benny's too connected.
Yeah.
He's having a bad trot, though. He's due a winner, isn't he?
No, I think he's been due a winner for a while, but that's not his point. I don't think backing winners is necessarily his business model, Jason.
No, I'm sure it's not.
Jason, thanks so much for your time. Always great to talk. Always, we'll keep in touch. There's plenty, obviously, going with the bookie group, but your insights into your couple of years inside the walls of the PRA and your broader wagering experience is always greatly appreciated, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure you'll probably we'll speak when this review into Queensland racing comes down, because I'm as intrigued as anybody to see what it looks like.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, guys.
The following segment is brought to you by Inglis, the strongest collection of sire power ever assembled for an Australian 2-year-old sale. We offered at the Inglis Ready to Race sale on Thursday, October 16th. A catalogue of 222 lots has been finalised for the auction and is now available on the Inglis website. The Inglis Ready to Race sale is easily the best and most progressive 2-year-old sale in the country. It's provided almost 800 individual winning graduates since 2016 at an average earning per runner of over $111,000, some 35% higher than its nearest rival. It also has the highest winners to runners ratio of any Southern Hemisphere breeze-up sale. Breeze-ups will be held at Warwick Farm, Taupo and Wangaratta ahead of the sale with vision uploaded to the Inglis website. Check out the catalogue at inglis.com.au. Tim, we spent last week in the breeding heartland of the Hunter Valley, pardon me. As you mentioned before, you did all the driving, which was greatly appreciated by my good self and skillfully avoided any trouble. Mind you, a few detours around floods and, some poor directions by the guy in the navigator's seat, but we got there eventually. We were able to see around 40 stallions across 8 individual stallion parades. It was a very busy weekend. You see a lot of horses and a lot of people. I mean, what did you take out of the 3 days we spent touring around that part of the world?
I think, there's been a lot of negativity from the breeding sector over the last probably 18 months as, the market's come off a bit and the costs of production have gone up. But breeders are resilient. Yeah, and, punters, owners, trainers, everyone has to be resilient in this game because more losers than winners. But it seems like people are going to butter up again and probably the foal crop won't maybe not fall off as much as people suggest. It is always a good time in the Hunter Valley, isn't it? The week just before spring rolls around, lots of nice horses. Yeah, I thought people were quite optimistic. There's a few deals going on, 2-for-1s and different things like that. But by and large, I was quite optimistic leaving the Hunter Valley that the breeding industry will be okay. There'll be some tough patches, but yeah, I was confident that it's not going anywhere anytime soon, and the reinvestment will keep occurring.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's kind of like a time of year. It's like the traditional sort of end of winter, mark the start of the harvest sort of period, in terms of how it would work. And I think for a lot of these people, it's probably their last chance to sort of socialise before they get into the hurly-burly of the stallion season. And, with foals already arriving, it's a very busy time of year for farms. And, plenty of rain up there, which is a positive thing. That's the one thing you need to count on in primary production is, getting those, getting enough rain to, create the growth and develop the horses. That's important about that. What stood out to you about the stallions on offer, Tim? I mean, we saw a fair few new boys up there, a few guys we'd obviously seen plenty of times before. What was your sort of perspective on what we saw in terms of the bloodstock up there?
I guess everyone's looking at the first season stallions, and Whedon's got Cogburn and Arrowfield's shuttling Van Dijk, and then to me, one of their first ones we saw was Starlust at Riverstone. And he's a very nice son of Zoo Star, Grade 1 winner in the States on turf. I thought that was interesting. 2 parts. As I said, he looks like a good Zoo Star, an Australian-style horse, but also points to the fact that, Riverstone's run by a young guy called Nick Taylor, and he's with his business partners is investing in a stallion. It's not an easy game, but he's there for the long haul, despite, as we said, some of the negativity around the industry at the moment, that he sees a future and he's having a real crack. And as I said, I don't think you can knock the horse on looks. So hopefully, sounds like he's going to get good support. And hopefully in a few years' time, we're talking about the Starlusts making an impact on the track.
Yep, exactly right. I mean, it's awesome. A host of other lovely first season stallions. Darley, obviously, one of our sponsors here. We saw, Broadsiding, who, is a spectacular looking horse, and I think from memory paraded just after his own sire, Too Darn Hot, which was great to see. And traffic warden there as well. We saw a host of other first season stallions, Storm Boy, City of Troy, etc. Obviously Switzerland at Coolmore. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see how they're received, and you can see those people who maybe might have 3 or 4 mares. The stallion parade is really important for them. They may have already made up their decision, but it certainly helps them back up what they're thinking about, doesn't it?
Yeah, just to see that, it's different to see them in the flesh, isn't it? And you go, actually, that is a nice horse. You try and envisage mating your mare with that stallion, how the foal might turn out, if only it was that easy. But it does, especially, Broadsiding's full, Too Darn Hot's full. I'm sure it's a marketing exercise for some to say it's full, hurry up and make a booking. But for those stallions that you're possibly punting that a third season might kick on, just to see them in the flesh and remind yourself, actually, that's how they've let down. There's opportunities there below the obvious, and the first seasons or the provens like Zoo Stars and I'm Invincibles, which obviously carry the service fee to justify that.
Yeah, and it was actually what I was impressed by was Zoo Star looked fantastic, and he was such a, a lot of these stallions probably aren't necessarily social animals per se. They don't like to be around people that much, but Zoo Star was getting photos taken with people. Obviously, it's champion stallion. It's a terrific achievement from Whedon, but I thought that was quite amazing, and and just to see the how those older stallions, like So You Think, looked $1 million. God, he's a beautiful looking horse. All Too Hard, great appreciation of him as a stallion. We had Divinery, and it was obviously interesting to see them, but he's done a remarkable job as well. And maybe I'm a bit of a sentimental person in that regard, but I love seeing those old champion stallions in terms of what they were able to produce on the racetrack, and then go on and produce Group 1 winners at start is quite remarkable. Look, often the value as a journalist at those things too, Tim, is the conversations you have with people. We had a lot of conversations with people across the 3 or 4 days we were up there. Well worthwhile getting a bit of a temperature test on the industry, and those issues we spoke about, the pattern, costs of training, costs of breeding, the foal crop drop. Like, the industry is pretty acutely aware of its challenges, isn't it, Tim? And where those things are. It was interesting at the Yarraman Parade on Friday, Artie Mitchell coming out and saying, there's a lot of challenges, or a lot of things, political challenges in the industry at the moment. I urge you to go and discuss them. I thought that was interesting. I think there's probably been a little bit of a awakening that breeders can't stick their head in the sand on some of the broader issues in racing at the moment, and that maybe we need to address them. So, speaking of some challenges, positive news out of Tasmania this week, my home state, with an additional $1 million of a raft of initiatives aimed at the state's owners, trainers and breeders. The TasBreed scheme's prize money pool increased to $2.15 million, $20,000 bonus prize money per race to be rolled out on all 2- and 3-year-old handicaps, select maiden and Class 1 races and other feature races. Magic Millions committing to conducting the Tasmanian yearling sale until at least 2030, extending the partnership for another 5 years. That's a big thing for the state. Microshare syndicated My Racehorse Fair in Dubai are yearling at next year's Tassie yearling sale at Quercus Park, and the Magic Millions 2-year-old and 3-year-old races both being moved from Launceston to Hobart to be staged on Tassie Derby Day. Look, a few things there, but probably the broader message out of there was probably some positivity required, and some investment put in both through government and Tas Racing into the Tassie breeding industry, which has been in a pretty difficult state over the past couple of years, including a massive drop in the amount of foals being born and the amount of mares being bred too, Tim. I mean, it looks like this is a way for those to put a bit of faith in the industry, the people who like Armadale Starters, Standing Bodyguard and others within the industry, to ensure that there is a breeding industry there at least in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, and those Tas breeding bonuses, if you can win one, 20,000 goes a long way. And I think what's important is the trainers component of those bonuses. $1,000 cash, but you can turn it into $4,000 at the as a sale voucher, effectively, a bit like the Bob's Double Up or the Vovis, I think, platinum vouchers that owners can win in Victoria. One of the issues in Tassie has been the lack of the trainers investing in their local sale. They preferred to buy, tried horses probably on English Digital and different formats and quick return that way, rather than, going to the yearling sale, supporting their locally bred horses and hoping they get a superstar out of that sale. You need competition, and, John Blackers of the world have done a good job over the last few years, but you would hope the top 10 to 15, well, nearly every trainer, but 10 to 15 Tassie trainers all going by 2 or 3 yearlings a year would make a huge difference, and not for a huge amount of money, but just so hopefully these incentives give some certainty to go, okay, at least Magic Millions is there till 2030. We can go, let's go and have a proper crack.
Yeah, and that'll be all tied up around we've spoken about this before, but the funding deed in 2029 being renewed for racing. Obviously, it's just assumption that will be done. However, assumptions lately in Tasmania are proving incorrect, especially around the future of the greyhound industry. On the track, just a quick mention there to Written Tycoon, milestone 100th winner last week. Remarkable stallion, given how, not only is he a champion stallion, obviously, but given how much he's travelled around. Now, I don't think of too many thousand winner stallions that would have had as many homes as he's had across the years. Obviously, Yulong now doing amazing things. He's got a lot to come to him. He's extraordinary. They're now 4-year-olds, the 3-year-old crop from last season that were conceived at Arrowfield, and just the mares that he served at Yulong over the last few years. It's obviously his oldest Yulong crop's now just turned 3. We can expect him to have a major impact and probably a bit of a resurgence, possibly to contend this year for the title. So, well done to Written Tycoon, 1,000 winners. It puts him in the elite company of size to aside that many winners, and a great effort nonetheless. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. We've talked about the best emerging stallions. Now let me throw another one into the mix. Native Trail. Breeders couldn't stop calling him the best looking stallion on the Darley roster. And that's on top of being a champion 2-year-old and a classic winner at 3. The scary part, his foals are just as sharp looking as he is. Like Too Darn Hot all over again, but with his own twist. Native Trail has the looks, the race record, and now the foals to back it up. he's staring you right in the face. Native Trail standing at Darley Kelvin's side for $27,500. On to wagering now, Tim, and positive results for Tabcorp this week. Last year, results were pretty disastrous, $1.4 billion loss. This year, they're back in a sort of a $35 million profit range. This time around, group EBITDA was reported to be up 23.2%, revenue up 11% to $2.6 billion, or 12%, sorry. All very positive numbers. Look, the uplift from the new Victoria licence drove nearly all of that growth, although Tabcorp has reported it banked $39 million in operational savings, which came from its sort of much publicised staff reductions. So an interesting time for Tabcorp, some positive news. The share market went bananas about it. I think it jumped to 88 cents, which is up 20% over in the space of a couple of minutes on Wednesday morning. Market cap now close to $2 billion. Gil McLaughlin's got the wind at his back. He probably walked into this role, Tim, with a bit of wind in his face. The wind's definitely at his back now, and there's a sense that Tabcorp now can rebuild its presence in Australia through its great strength, which is retail and the tote.
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, there's been a lot of changes. He's cut costs from that business, and it's obviously, made a big difference to the balance sheet, the way they're going. They're probably coming from a long way back. Like, some might say, you'd hope from now on some innovation and different things like that might come to the fore, and they're, Gil's still talking about a national tote and things like that. So hopefully now they're back in profit, that some innovation and will help the punters and the industry and turnover and particularly on racing.
Yeah, they did confirm that racing turnover had dropped 4% over the past 12 months, so that's a bit of a sobering aspect for racing. Sport turnover has grown 5.3%, so that dynamic of sport taking share of market from racing continues with Tabcorp. Another interesting aspect was Tabcorp results with the cash wagering grew 17.5%, which probably raised a few eyebrows for those who are elsewhere in the industry, given Tabcorp pretty much has a monopoly on cash wagering, given its retail presence. Other news involving Tabcorp: they've got to re-up their on-course presence in Victoria, agreement between them, Racing Victoria and Country Racing Victoria, around significant country racing meetings to make sure they've got a presence on course during those meetings. Who's paying for it? We don't know. A betting man would say it's the racing industry, but it's said to be commercial in confidence. Warwick Barr is penning a yarn as we speak, which will be up shortly on the straight about that one. And just a final point on wagering, Tim. Andrew Fruis appointed Entain Roll permanently. He's now the CEO of the Australian and New Zealand business. That's a major role. Obviously, he took that role on a temporary basis when Dean Shannon left in June. I'll be speaking to Andrew Fruis later today, and we'll have a story up in the straight probably early next week with a detailed interview with him about the future plans of Entain, which has obviously had a relatively uncertain past 12 months. Tim, we'll have a couple of questions from the viewers, which we'll quickly dip into. We're sort of running a little bit short of time here. I'll answer this one. I'm looking for a straight answer. How on earth has a horse been registered with the name Show Canty? I register 2 or 3 horses a year and have names rejected left, right and centre for no good reason. But surely there's a very good reason to reject Show Canty. Well, got a couple of thanks for that. I think it was Anna on the email. Anna, I've got some news for you. Bad news for you. Show Canty never won a Group 1, so his name won't be protected. So that's for the first challenge. The second one is up until about 5 years ago, there was a ban on horses being named after races. So the Show Canty quality would have prevented him being named at it. But I'm informed by a reliable source that article in the Racing Australia Charter was changed a few years ago. So you can name a horse after a race. So unfortunately, there's no reason why a horse can't be called Show Canty, apart from the fact is, why would you want to call an emerging horse after a good horse? It just sets an impossible standard. Tim, one more, I'll just chuck at you quickly here. Is it time the bookies become more active in taking bets that take on the book?
Oh, in theory, yes, that'd be great. But as we've discussed ad nauseum, the tax structure just doesn't incentivize bookies to take on too much action, depending on the state of the POC taxes, different things like that. It's not about pricing up races and trying to make a book and a little percentage on nearly every runner and things like that. The market's changed, and some will say for the worse, but just at the moment, you can't blame bookies that, keep putting up markets, and taking big bets, and from sharper punters taking too much action and losing race after race. It's just not a sustainable business. No one can keep running a business and losing money. So it's a fine balance. And at the moment, the way it's structured, there's no incentive for those business models. As Tristan Mellahan would suggest with Top Sport now selling on to better.
Yeah, and we saw like an example like Combat, who tried a completely different model, which is an auction model, which ended pretty swiftly for them. Good on Jake Howard for trying that model on, but that was supposed to offer a better opportunity for punters. It didn't work out that way. The smart guys just took the money, so that's the challenge. It's probably not the everyday punter that they're putting this up for. They just want to make sure they mitigate the risk against those who have better information than them. All right, thanks for joining us on Straight Talk. If you want to send us an email or message or social media or whatever else, happy to answer your questions and go through those. editor@straight.com.au. Send us an email through that. Today's episode, of course, brought to you by our fabulous sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast, be it watching us on YouTube, you might be listening through Apple, you might be going through Spotify or Podbean or one of those platforms. We're on all the platforms. Make sure you check us out and have a listen through a few of our older episodes. Give us some feedback. Tell us if we're improving. Yeah, again, send us an email. Always happy to hear from you. Thanks for joining us today. We'll speak to you again next week.